Good morning. My name's Tim Carlisle. I'm the District 4 Program Quality Director. Anat has been in Toastmasters 2.5 years. She's currently the president of Toasters Digest and vice president of public relations for San Francisco Storytellers. She recently chaired our latest Toastmasters Leadership Institute and will share her knowledge of setting up Zoom securely and for district events. Over to you, Anat.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to share out my screen so that you can see how to change the settings in Zoom. You'll need to log into your Zoom portal in your web browser in order to make changes. Here we've logged into the Program Quality Director's account, and you're going to go down to Settings. All the meeting settings are in here, so we're going to go one by one through these, and I'll let you know which ones you need to turn off or on, depending on what you need for your meeting. I want to say here first that Zoom has several feature updates, and so you need to make sure that you have the most recent Zoom version. I believe it's 5.4.9, but by the time this video goes out, maybe it will already have new updates. Make sure you have the most recent version. This is a new feature. Required that all meetings are secured with one security option. It looks like this setting cannot be changed here, so I'm going to leave it. We recommend having a waiting room. And if you set this on here, it means that all of your meetings are going to have a waiting room. I recommend leaving this on. Here we have set everyone will go into the waiting room. There are other options, but this is the best one for most meetings. You can use this customize waiting room UI to add elements that will show up on the page when people end up in the waiting room and are waiting to get into the Zoom meeting. I will not do this here, but you can upload a Toastmasters logo and a description of the meeting and a title that matches whatever it is that you want to say. So maybe you want to instruct people to download a set of handouts or an agenda. You'll want to require a meeting passcode. And you'll want to require it even for participants who join by phone. This is a setting here that you'll have to make a decision on. If you are publishing a link to join your meeting online, I recommend turning this off. The reason for this is that if it's a publicly distributed link, then if you embed the passcode in the link, anyone can come in, and that is an invitation for Zoom bombing. If, on the other hand, you create a meeting where people have to register ahead, it's okay to include the passcode in the link because it will go straight to the person's email inbox after they register, and it's a little bit more secure. Again, this is a choice you have to make. Authenticated users joining meetings. For large events, you should leave this off. But if it's a meeting where maybe only people who are logged into Zoom should be able to join, maybe it's a smaller meeting at the district level, you could turn this on. That would require that user be authenticated before they come in. That usually means that they're signed into Zoom. So now, the meeting settings. Usually we leave these two settings off, the host and participant video. What that means is that when people first log on to the call, it's possible for their video to be off. For audio type, we usually choose telephone and computer audio. And we usually don't allow participants to join before the host. This is because we want to know who's coming in and control who we let into the waiting room. So this is turned off. If you find that on, just toggle that button over. Muting all participants when they join a meeting. This is a really useful feature. If you don't want to set this for all of your meetings, you can actually set it for an individual meeting, and I'll show you how to do that. If you want this to be the case for every single meeting, turn it on in the global settings here. Under in-meeting settings, sometimes we do turn this feature on to require encryption. It depends on the nature of your meeting. For the chat, I would say turn that on, unless you want to disable chat completely. But we usually recommend not doing that because this, again, is global settings. It's going to affect all of your meetings. Private chat is something you can set globally. We usually leave it on. It's actually possible to turn it off within a Zoom meeting, so you don't have to do that here. For district level events, we recommend turning auto saving chat on. That way you don't have to worry about saving the chat. It will automatically save into a text file right after your Zoom session closes. That's useful because at some Toastmasters events, it may be necessary to go back into the chat and see what someone wrote. Maybe people provided links to resources, etc. I'm going to turn that back off because it was not set before. Sound notifications when people join or leave. This is something that only a Zoom host would hear, if I'm not mistaken. You can turn that on if you want, but I find it to be fairly disruptive, so I usually turn that off. File transfers, we usually don't allow this. It's a little bit more secure. We leave the feedback to Zoom on in case there are any issues during the meeting. It means that the host can actually send feedback to Zoom in real time. The end of meeting experience feedback survey is actually for participants. And since at Toastmasters events, we usually have feedback surveys anyway, we turn this feature off. So as not to overload our guests. You will want co-hosting on. This allows the host to add co-hosts. It means that they can allow other participants in the Zoom meeting to control some aspects of the meeting. For example, they'll be able to mute other people if they need to. So turn that on. Polling is something you can turn on too if you want to be able to launch a poll in the middle of a meeting. I'll show you how to set up a poll when I talk about how to set up a meeting that includes registration. The meeting control toolbar, this is optional. For some people, they really want it to always show so that they have ready access to all the controls. Not critical, depends on what you would like. I recommend turning Zoom window during screen share off. When people do a screen share, one of the options is to show the Zoom window itself. I would turn that off. It's less confusing, and usually people do not need to show that. For screen sharing, we always set it to host only for security. The reason I set it to host only here is that during a Zoom meeting, even if you want others to be able to share the screen, you can actually set that up in the middle of a live Zoom session. So it doesn't need to be set here. So for more security, we set it to host only here. Annotation is something that is not very common, but if you wanted to do a share of, let's say, a whiteboard, you could allow annotation, which means that people can actually write on it while it's being shared. We often either turn this off or we set it up so that only the sharer can annotate, meaning others cannot write on top of whatever you're sharing. Same thing with the whiteboard. You can turn this off. And if you leave it on, I would say set it up to autosave so that you can actually have a record of what was shared. Remote control should definitely be off. You don't want others to control shared content during your meeting. Nonverbal feedback refers to things like the digital raise hand feature and some other buttons that might appear in the participants pane or possibly under the reactions tab in the newer Zoom version. You want to turn that on if you want to have those features. So these are things like a yes button, a no button, a go slower button. And yes, I can see here, because this is a new version of Zoom, it says these icons are found in the reactions menu in the toolbar now. So you turn that on if you want people to be able to use that feature. Reactions, these are emojis that show up in the top left corner of a person's video. These are things like clapping hands, heart, or laughter. You can turn those on or off depending on what you want. Allowing removed participants to rejoin, I don't recommend turning that on. A removed participant is someone who a host or a co-host has actually chosen to boot out of the meeting. And we usually leave that off. Participants renaming themselves. This is actually a very helpful feature, especially for club officer trainings. Often we ask the Zoom participants to rename themselves according to the role that they serve in a club. And actually at other meetings, they may need to rename themselves according to what role they hold in the district. So we like them to be able to do it themselves. Otherwise, the host or the co-host have to do it for them, and that can be tedious. Hiding participant profile pictures. We usually leave this off, but if you wanted to, you could turn it on. What it means is that if I turn my video off, my profile picture would not show. We usually leave this feature off. Breakout rooms are really common for Zoom meetings that include many, many participants and multiple parallel sessions, or club contests where you might need a room just for the judges and ballot counters, or a room just for evaluation contestants. You'll want to turn this feature on so that you can actually use it. A nice thing that Zoom has is the ability for you to actually assign participants to breakout rooms ahead of time when you're scheduling the meeting. We don't use this very often, but it's a nice to have. Virtual backgrounds. They are fun, but depending on the nature of your meeting, you may want to disallow them. We usually allow them. One thing that we often do is uncheck this option that says allow use of videos. When people use videos in their background, sometimes it gives others in the room motion sickness. So we usually turn that off for district events. I'm going to leave it as it was. I'm scrolling through to see if any of these features are necessary. Showing a join from your browser link. This can be useful, but it really compromises the Zoom functionality if you allow it. What it means is that someone can avoid downloading Zoom as an application on their device and just join from the browser, but their experience will be a little bit more limited. So we usually leave it off and we haven't run into problems. This is a nifty feature, but we don't use it because it can be a little bit cumbersome. You can actually set it up so that people actually have to request permission to be unmuted. It's sort of heavy-handed, so we don't use it. These email notifications, you can go through and decide which ones you want to receive. These have to do with whether or not you receive an email when different events happen. So for example, this is an important one. If an attendee joins the meeting before the host. Now I mentioned earlier that we turned off allow attendees to join before the host. What this really means is that, let's say I click on the Zoom link before Tim is in the room. He'll receive an email that says, Anat has tried to join your Zoom meeting. You should start your meeting so that you can let her in. There's some other settings here that are kind of useful. We recommend turning this one on. And we usually don't assign scheduling privileges to anyone else. So those are all of the meeting settings. When you go to make a recording, you'll want to switch over to the recording tab and go through the settings here to decide where you're recording to. This will depend a lot on what you want to do with your recording. For cloud recordings, which we definitely recommend turning that feature on because sometimes Toastmasters events go for several hours and most people don't have a lot of room on their devices locally. You'll notice that this says record active speaker with shared screen. What that means is that if someone is doing a slide share, then there will be a thumbnail in the top right that shows the active speaker. And you can decide if you want an audio only file or to save the chat in addition to the video recording. You can see some of those settings. Again, you'll have to go through and decide exactly what you want, how you want your videos to come out, what kinds of things you want to show or not show. Now I'm going to go and create a meeting. So I'm going to schedule a meeting where you have to register for it. And I'm also going to make it a recurring meeting. You don't have to do both of these, but for demonstration purposes. So we're going to call this demo. You can enter a description if you want. And today is the 18th, but I'm going to make it recur every Tuesday at noon. So you can choose how often you want it to recur. I've set it to be weekly, and you can choose if you want it to end on a specific date or after some number of weeks in this case. You want to check this box if you want people to register. Register means that people are going to visit a page where they input their name and email information before registering. You'll always want to require a passcode. you actually have the option to change it. For district level events, you may want to change it to a word or phrase that is easy for people to remember. So for example, you might write District 4 or something else that's maybe toast. You get the idea. I'll leave it at District 4. And you'll want to leave that waiting room on. I mentioned before when we were going through the global meeting settings that you could decide if you want to require a waiting room for every meeting. If you don't set it up there, you'll want to set it here. And then when I was talking about authentication, you can also do that for a single meeting. I'm going to leave that off. The video settings here tell you if the host or the participants need to have their video on when they enter. It's not going to change whether or not they can turn on or off their video, but you want to set that initial setting. Here we've set them both to off. For audio, we usually recommend doing both. And for meeting options, here is the important thing: muting participants upon entry. In our opinion, that is a way to ensure that meetings are a little bit less disruptive. We usually don't check this box, allowing participants to join anytime. And in fact, that conflicts with having a waiting room anyway. You can pre-assign participants to a breakout room, but we don't normally do that. You can do it though. We'd have to import all the names and probably their emails. You can also set automatically record, and you may have a choice between recording locally or on the cloud. So I'm going to save this now. And I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom because here there are some registration, poll, and branding and email settings that you can set up. For registration, I'm going to open this just so you can see what it looks like. You can choose whether or not it's automatically approved. We usually leave it here because often people register at the last minute for events. But if it's something that requires manual approval, you can do that. You can also view these options and decide what you'd like. And you can check off this if you really want it. If you do this though, you're going to receive an email for every single person who registers. So if there's 150 registrants, you will receive 150 emails. You can actually decide what questions to ask. So for example, you might want to know what Toastmasters Club the person is in. I'm not sure if that's not here, sorry, that's over one tab under custom questions. So you could ask, what Toastmasters Club are you in? I'm going to make it required. All right, what is your club number? Under email settings, you can set the contact. So what happens is that when people register for an event, they receive an email with all of the Zoom information. It's a confirmation email, but then it leaves the email contact at the bottom, and that, if you want that to be maybe a different email, say the organizer of the event, not you, you could change it here. Branding allows you to upload a banner or logo for that registration page. I'll show you what that looks like when I go to register for this meeting. And then polling, if you have that feature on, which I talked about under the global settings, you could actually create a poll. So I'm going to write, what officer roles have you held? If you set it to anonymous, it means that you're not going to know who answered what. If you leave this off, then you can actually download a poll report later on. I'm going to copy this question. And, you know, you would have various answers, etc. I'm not going to go through them all. We'll save it. So you can see that there are a variety of things you can set up in here when you have a registered meeting. Now, here is the Zoom link that you would distribute to others. If you take a close look at the link, it does not actually show the meeting ID or the password. You can see that there's the word register in there. If I were to visit this link, which I'm going to do right now, I would input my information, and then you see that question pops up. I would write my club number. The branding tab that I showed earlier, that would put something up here in the banner section, or it would put a logo on the right of where you see all of these times. You can see that this is every Tuesday up until sometime in March. That was what we had set for that meeting. If I register, then I will receive an email from quality@d4tm.org. And it will include this same customized Zoom link. Here you can see the Zoom meeting ID. And you can also see a very long set of characters that indicates exactly who I am. So this token is unique for every single person who registers for the meeting. So that's really, really cool. We use that heavily. We are back at the meetings screen. So you've logged into your Zoom account. You've set up this meeting. As we spoke before, this includes a registration link. We've set up some details down below, and we've made it a recurring meeting. You can see that there are multiple occurrences. You can share out this URL by copying the invitation if you want more information. So I can copy the meeting information. Another way to do this is to add the meeting to your Google Calendar. For most people, when they click on Google Calendar, this will actually create an event, and then they can type in the email addresses of everyone that they want to invite to the meeting. Thank you.
I greatly appreciate your help with this. If you have any questions, I will put my email in, make it available. It is quality@d4tm.org, quality@d4tm.org if you have any questions.